Hello class, today we are going to learn about creating wireframes. Hopefully by now you've already watched the videos that I put out there that describe Project 3, as well as you've read the PDF that contains all the information about the rubric and other items that you'll need to get a good grade in Project 3. You've probably noticed I've been using the term wireframe mostly, but there is an important distinction between wireframes, prototypes, and mockups. So a wireframe, as you can see, is just going to show the basic representations of design. It could be done very simply with a pen and paper, or it could be done with other software. And it's going to be done for communication with our team members and for documentation. A prototype, on the other hand, is going to showcase a website's interactivity. In 240 we'll build sites that have things like slideshows, they'll have drop-downs, all sorts of elements that a user will interact with. And sometimes just a static image doesn't really portray how a user will interact with these pieces. So a prototype will showcase how this interactivity will work. This will be important for the UI team if you have a human-centered computing person working on your team, or somebody doing usability testing, things like that a prototype will help with. And finally there's a mock-up. This is going to look almost like a finished product. It's going to maybe incorporate the branding. If you're working for a company, you'll start to incorporate the colors, things like that. And this part is going to be used mainly to for stakeholder buy-in. So if you're developing a site for a client, you would want to get their buy-in, and you'd want to show them something a little more complete. So you show them a mock-up as opposed to a wireframe. In Project 1 and Project 2, we might have gotten away without producing a wireframe or much of a plan beforehand. This is because our pages were fairly simple. They were just one long page for Project 1. And for Project 2, it was also somewhat simple because we didn't have to worry about multiple columns. We had to worry a little bit about responsive design, but I was pretty forgiving, and I'll be pretty forgiving on when I grade those. But for Project 3, we're going to have a lot more complexity. First off, we're building the project just from a basic idea that we have. So we don't really have a plan in mind like the Project 2 description told us exactly what we wanted on each page and where things could go. Secondly, it's a bit more complicated because we'll be creating a site that needs to be a lot more mobile friendly. So we need to plan on how things are going to look in desktop but also in mobile. Now when you were doing Project 2, I imagine some of you probably ran into some difficulties when you maybe produced your page all at once and then you decided you needed to make it look mobile. It probably involved a lot of trial and error, and some of those headaches could be eliminated by planning things out ahead of time. As you've also probably noticed, it took a lot of work to make little changes once you've made a website. So imagine how much harder it is to make a subtle change in your design in HTML versus how much easier it could be to make a subtle change when you're just working with pen and paper. At this point we only have about a month left, so we really want to maximize our time. So let's start talking a little bit about wireframes. So like an architectural blueprint that you would want if you were building a house, you're also going to want to have this when you build your website. It's going to be an integral part to this. It's also going to be very important later on when we're working in teams. Some of us might be really good developers, some of us might be really good graphic designers, and having a good plan ahead is going to allow us to build a website in a team. Now fortunately for us right now, it's just going to be us. We don't need to worry about quite that big of a plan, and I'm not requiring you send completed design documents for this project, but we want to start thinking in those in that way. When you get into Web and Mobile 2, for example, you're going to have to create a huge design document for about a month or two before you even start building the website itself. So here's an example of a very simple wireframe. And you'll notice I said digital wireframe because this was produced, I believe, using Photoshop or something similar. It's not hand-drawn, so that's why I'm using the term digital. And you'll see this is kind of a mobile wireframe. We'll talk a bit about mobile first and designing wireframes both for the desktop and mobile. And you'll see we have three parts to this wireframe. We have a header, we have a body, and then we have a footer. Now, I might have talked about this earlier in the semester, and I want to reiterate this now. This is also a good time to prioritize our content. When people say mobile first, sometimes they're talking about, yes, when we're doing our HTML, we actually build our mobile HTML first, we build those CSS rules first, and then later on we build desktop styles. Now, I'm not super concerned with which way you guys decide to do this. If you want to build your desktop styles first and then make it scale down to mobile, I think that's okay with me. But when I hear mobile first, what I do want you guys doing is thinking about how your site is going to look in mobile first, or at least during this concurrently when you're coming up with the desktop design. And one good reason why this might be helpful is because it will help you prioritize your content with what is most important. So in this example, our red is probably our logo, and we've placed it at the top of our page. So this is the most important, both in our desktop and our mobile website. However, on desktop, we're sometimes able to cheat a little bit. So let's say this was a module about news, and this was something about weather, and maybe this was a featured classified item if this was a newspaper. On desktop, we were able to get away with putting these all side by side. We didn't really have to say, oh, this one's more important, so we put this one first. We've been able to squeeze these all side by side, and they're all kind of above that fold on the website. So everybody on a desktop will automatically see these three items when they go to this page. However, we don't have the same luxury on mobile, as you can see. On mobile, we're only able to display two items here. This third one would get cut off. So when we think about mobile first, it kind of helps us because we can prioritize our content before we start building the design. So let's say we really want to show this classified ad module. So this classified ad module we would put as number 1. And then maybe the news snippet is number 2, and we can put that here. So by designing mobile first, it really forces us to think about things in priority in a linear fashion. What's first, what's second, what's third, what's fourth. Versus in this view, we can kind of say, well, this is first, this is second, and all this is third. We don't have that luxury, as you can tell, in mobile. Now let's get into the steps of actually building a wireframe. The first step you might want to do is get some inspiration. So there's a site I listed here that will show you some ideas, things like that. Or you could visit a site that you actually like. Now in this example, I've shown kind of the CNN website, and this is sort of a different way of doing websites. It probably doesn't always come up this way, but you'll see we've superimposed a wireframe almost on top of the CNN site layout, and we've kind of broken it into pieces that we could then later borrow when we're building our own site. In this case, for example, we have the breaking news headline here, which we'll just represent with like a gray square, and then we have our sort of primary or lead article in here in the center, and then over here we have a featured video. Down here, for example, all these items are related in the sense that they're also kind of the latest videos, I believe. I think down here we have stuff about the stock market. So this is one way you could kind of overlay a wireframe on top of it. Also, there's going to be a lot of different workflows we can follow when we're building wireframes. Now, these more complex workflows are probably going to be ones that we would use if we were in a big team. So these workflows we might use when we are in Web and Mobile 2 or a further downstream course. but we might use this simpler workflow when it's just us and we only have a month to work on it. As you'll see here, this gives an example of a more complicated workflow here. So the first step we might want to do in here is we sketch. So this is just pen and paper, or even on a whiteboard, just very basic. Next, we're kind of saying wireframe. So this is maybe that digital wireframe where we've moved our very basic pencil paper drawings and we've put them in a digital format. Now for our homework, I'm okay with you either doing it by pen and paper or doing it in a digital wireframe tool. So these I'm kind of lumping together for the most part. In this case, as I said, it's a more extensive workflow, so we actually have a step where we make high definition wireframes. Then maybe we start focusing on the visual aspects of the site, and then we can begin coding. So you see we have a lot to do before we start coding, versus in project 1 and 2, we might have just started coding. We don't necessarily want to do that for project 3. Now here's a workflow for a site that's going to have a lot of interactivity. Maybe a site that's a video website or something where a user has to interact with a lot of interfaces. This one we've added in this interactive prototype. This might be used to get stakeholder buy-in. This will demonstrate how each of the pieces will function when a user interacts with them. Next, we need to actually choose a tool to do our wireframing in. As I mentioned here, I'm okay with you guys doing it pen or pencil and paper. And there's also several cloud-based tools out there. I think I just did a Google search and these were sort of the top 3 that came up, but there's hundreds if not thousands of these. I'll probably do a demo at the end of this lecture of using some of these tools, but I'd encourage you to attempt to use some of these yourself. So these are cloud-based ones, and then we also have ones that actually live on your desktop. Now this one I think is fairly new. It's called Adobe XD, and I believe with our Adobe license we are able to now get access to this for the rest of the semester, and it might even be free. I need to double check with this one. It's very easy to use. You can pick predefined screen sizes, things like that, and build your layout. So I'll probably do a quick demo of this later on as well. And then you also have Adobe InDesign or Illustrator. There's other ones out there, other Adobe products that people use as well. These, as I mentioned, you do have access to for the rest of the semester. But they're a little tricky sometimes with wireframes because they're very complex, and when we want to do something very quick, we don't necessarily need the complexity that an InDesign or a Photoshop or Illustrator offer. But that being said, if you are already very familiar with Photoshop, there's no harm in doing it there, and you might save time doing it there as opposed to having to learn a whole brand new tool. Next, we've even done a little more experimentation with colors and white space, things like that. In this example here, let's pretend we're doing an e-commerce site. So our main objective that we wanted users to be able to do is actually buy the product. We're not going to stay in business very long unless people buy the thing. So we've really made this stand out by instead putting a black background and white text here versus these other menu items. We've also played around with this a little bit. And our 3 areas. So this is just a typical time where you might want to try out really calling attention to the main objectives that we have with our site. Finally, what we do here is we can do some additional enhancements and fine-tuning with Grayscale. You'll see we kind of made this area stand out a little bit by providing, it almost feels like this area is now a block. Even though they're 2 separate sections, we've kind of grouped these 2 areas together by applying this light grayscale background, but we haven't yet put in our full color scheme yet. We wouldn't want to put in our full color scheme until maybe a later prototype. But this could easily be fitted in with our color scheme later on. So let's say we have our site actually has a color scheme of dark blue, light blue, and white. So once we actually get to building the final prototype, this might become a light blue or a gray. This might become a dark blue and a white. And this might be a light gray or a light blue. So we could still plug in our color scheme, but we're just using Grayscale for now just to simply kind of save time, but also to show what things might look like once we actually implement colors, without actually spending all the time implementing these colors yet. So I hope that kind of helped show you how you can start with a basic idea and start building a design that you can convert to a wireframe and then a prototype, and then later you'll actually spend the time building the HTML. Remember how time consuming that was, but we want to have a plan in mind before we start building. Now what I've done here is I've just opened up Adobe XD. This is one of the products that I believe we should be able to get, that we could use later on. If you want, if you have some time, I'd encourage you to install a few of these and try some of those cloud-based ones. But if you're very limited on time, or you're handy with just a pen and paper, feel free to create your wireframes just using that. Now you'll see here one nice thing about this Adobe XD is that we open it up. This is the screen you get when you first open, and it comes with several prototype designs, iPhone, iPad, things that we can use to start building our prototype. So this is going to save us some time. Also, I downloaded at one point like a iWatch template, so that's pretty neat. And I can even open up a full sales dashboard that I downloaded online as a demo. So let's go ahead and open this up. And let me adjust this a tiny bit here. Now you'll see in this scenario, we have a full sales dashboard here, and all these little elements are clickable. Now this would take probably a little while to build, so this is more like a finished prototype. We've implemented our brand colors. We have a lot of what looks like a finished looking product here. But it's easy to create new shapes and add features onto it. I've installed a couple plugins. This plugin, for example, I kind of liked. If you wanted to put in some placeholder text, you could simply create a box, and this would fill it in with that lorem ipsum text. I also installed a plugin that allows you to search for stock images. So if I were to search for cat, it's going to pull up some images that I can easily, I believe, kind of drag and drop into my project. Let's see, how do I get this in there? I think I have to download it, save it, and then maybe at that point I could pull it into my project. Let's see what else we have. We have this icons one, so these over here obviously are icons. If I wanted to add a configuration button and I didn't have this already in my project, I could search maybe for configuration, or actually let's just do config. I saw a few coming up there before, so I guess there's no match here. Let's try settings. So you'll see I had to kind of play around with our keyword, and now we have this nice little gear icon that we could then use in our project as well, that we could import into here. So this is just one of the many tools that you can use. If I have a little time midweek, I'll demo some other tools, but I just wanted to get you guys started. I'm not expecting you to hand in anything this complex in the discussion this week. What I'm looking for is something a lot more simple. So something maybe more like if you Google, you can get some inspiration. I could just look for something like a hand-drawn wireframe. Let's see what we get here. So something maybe more like this would be something that I'd like to see you guys work on. So this week, as I mentioned, is devoted solely to Project 3, so I really want you to think in depth about an idea and how it's going to look. This time you spend planning is really going to pay off with dividends if you do a good job this week.